Hello students, this is the Chapter 42 lecture on behavioral ecology, the struggle to find food and mates and to pass on genes. So behavior or behavioral ecology studies how behavior contributes to the differential success and reproduction of organisms. Behavior are the responses that we see that organisms offer in response to the internal or external stimuli that they experience. So from their environment or from their own internal environment, they are responding. And the study of those responses is behavioral ecology. Ethology focuses on the specific genetic and physiological mechanisms that exhibit behavior. So the proximate causes is where the ethology comes in. These are things that environment trigger the behavior, right? So it's the environment triggers the behavior. So one example is that birds tend to build nests, and as the days get longer or the days get shorter, it triggers a hormone in the birds to decide whether it's time to mate or not. That is a proximate cause. It's a change in the environment that makes them do something. The ultimate cause, though, is the more fitness-related cost, right? So it's the reason why they exhibit this behavior. And so on the nest building, the effect of reproductive success outweighs the cost of building the nest. So having a place to keep your eggs and having a safe place that's up in a tree and things like that gives your offspring a better chance of surviving and reproducing in future generations. It doesn't take quite as much effort to build a nest as it does to protect the eggs in the wild in a different way. So another example here, proximate cause, would be during an early critical development stage in young geese, if they observe their mother walking away but then calling them. As they see this, that's the proximate cause, and then the young geese follow and they imprint on their mother. The ultimate cause is that geese, when they're young, if they follow their mother, imprint on their mother, they will get more care from their mother. They will learn how to survive better than other siblings that follow something else or don't follow a mother at all. And this is true of other species as well, but especially in geese as they're imprinting when they're first born. So one of the things that influences genetics and behavior is innate behavior. And innate means like that self-driven or coming from inside of you. Sometimes it's known as genetically pre-programmed, right, behavior. So once it's initiated, it will go until it's over. So one of the examples of this is in geese as well. And so if a mother goose is in her nest and she sees an egg, she'll stretch out her neck, put her beak towards it, and get up and roll it back into the nest and sit back on it. Well, this improves the fitness of the egg, right? It increases its survival chances. The releaser initiates this behavior. And so if the egg is out of the nest, that's the releaser. The reason we know this is because you could put any round object in front of a goose's nest, in front of a goose, and the goose is going to imagine that it is one of its eggs. So it automatically, innately, it stretches out its neck towards it, gets up, moves towards it, and rolls it into its nest. So those are innate pre-programmed behaviors. And organisms learn, right? They can exhibit behavior from learning. When we learn something, we modify our behavior based on past experience. So one of the easiest forms of learning is habituation. An organism will ignore a repeated stimulus. So as meerkats start to hear human footsteps over and over and over and over and over, they eventually can learn to tune them out because they know these human footsteps that they hear are not a predator, right? And it's kind of a form of non-associative learning. So it decreases their response to a stimuli because it happens all the time with no effect. Associative learning, however, is an association that develops between a stimulus and the response. So the association develops because of the response to the stimuli, right? And there are two main types, classical and operant. Classical is the Pavlov's dog experiment, right? Or the example where the dog is hungry. And when he sees food, he's going to salivate because he's hungry and he wants to eat. Every time the dog would see food, Pavlov would ring a bell. Over time, the dog got to believe every time he heard a bell, he was getting fed. This became an involuntary response associated with a positive stimulus. Okay, so every time he'd hear a bell ring, the dog would start to salivate because he thought he was getting fed, even if no food was there. He'd ring the bell, still salivates, still thinks he's getting fed. This also happens with negative associations. So whatever response happens normally, every time a negative thing then happens, it will associate that stimuli with that negative thing coming, and it will react or behave accordingly. Operant conditioning, however, is reinforced by a consequence, and it's still the reward punishment idea, but it's known as trial and error learning because it's like this bird, right, who's eating a butterfly, but the butterfly tastes so disgusting. The bird just has no idea it's a nasty bug, and so he vomits. Well, once he's eaten it once, now he knows stay away from that butterfly. Same thing with toads. Toads eat insects, right? Munching away on flies, happy as a clam. He eats a bee and he gets stung. Oh no, better not eat another bee, right? So it's trial and error learning. You continue a behavior that gives a reward and you stop the behavior that gives a punishment. So behavior is both innate, that pre-programmed self telling you what to do, and learned. So genetics and learning influence all or most behaviors. An example, birds are pre-programmed, right? Intrinsically, they learn these songs, but they only learn the right song if the mother or father sings the songs during a critical period. And that critical period is a specific point in development that's specific to a species where the animal will start to learn those patterns of behavior. So if during the critical period, the mother or father isn't singing those songs, those tiny little chicks will not learn the right songs to sing and won't be able to attract mates. Imprinting is another example. And imprinting, geese do this intrinsically. They see the very first thing that they notice when they get out of their shell and they're walking. The first things they see, they think is their mother. So the ability to imprint is the innate behavior, right? The innate behavior is the ability to say, oh, something moved right in front of me. This is my mom. The environment is the stimulus at which the imprint is directed. And the way this was proved was because a scientist raising geese could then have the geese hatch out of the eggs and see him first before the mother. The geese would follow him to the end of the earth, and they would ignore the mother if he was around. So, how do organisms communicate? Because communication is a signal that can modify behavior in others. So when you think about this, if I am trying to tell you something, if I want you to do something, I have to give you a signal on what it is that I would like for you to do. or give you a signal that you understand so you know what you should do next, right? So one way that organisms communicate is through chemical signals. A chemical signal is an example would be like a scent lead by insects. So ants, they tend to drop little pheromones, and it tells other ants how to get to the food, right? And as the food is running out, they stop dropping the signal so that the ants don't follow that path anymore. Okay? Well, one of the things that happens when this chemical pheromone is released is that other organisms can pick up on it as well. And so there is a problem. Sometimes there will be spies, right, that want the food, or they may spy as a predator, and these ant decapitating flies will come and they will lay eggs on the ants, and then these eggs will kill the flies as they're growing into larvae. Another form would be auditory communication. And so birds will perch way high in the air and they will sing their songs out loud at dawn and at dusk. This sound carries so much farther the higher up they are. But because it might lure predators, they will only do it at dawn and dusk instead of all the time when predators might be able to find them more easily. Another would be visual communication. So you see this a lot with flashy males that show their fitness, right? Or it may show their strength if they have huge antlers, right? It also is a visual communication with male competition where they have fighting to have better access to mates. But as well, this visual communication can be done by predators. So there are fireflies that will flash a certain way to lure males in as if they're attracting them by the female flashing so they can eat them because they're hungry. The final way of communication that we see in a lot of organisms is tactile communication. And this is physical contact, right? Tactile's touch. So they can communicate and they bond through touch. And often in insects and things, this is through antennae. We know honeybees do these ornate special dances to show where food is and where things are that the honeybee might need. Ants communicate this way through their antenna and through touch as well to send signals to one another. And termites do as well. They touch almost constantly to be able to find where they're going because they are blind. So the next part about behavior that we want to look at are the theories that arise around what creates the best environment for living. And one of the things that is seen in organisms is living in groups can often offer a better chance of survival. Living in a group can reduce predation. An example would be a group of birds, right? There's a group of pigeons, and this is called the many eyes, right? It increases the vigilance because one pigeon can be looking around while the others are eating, and then the next one can look up while the others start eating again, right? And so with all these extra eyes looking around, the one individual decreases the time they have to watch for predators, so they get to feed more, right? The bigger the group, the more likely they are to spot a hawk or a predator before it gets to them. Protection in numbers. Predators usually take only one prey. Here comes a predator, it's going to get only one. So if there's 100, you have a much less chance of getting taken. You have a 1 in 100 chance, unless there was just 5 of you there, and then you have a 1 in 5 chance. So large group, way better chance at not being eaten. And there's also the idea of the selfish herd, and this is where each individual can maximize their fitness by living in the herd, but being as close to the center as possible, because as a predator comes up, it's not going to go digging around the herd, right? It is only going to pluck off the weakest link or the easiest on the most outskirt of the group to catch. So the group size and where you are in the group can benefit you as a whole, but there is a point where it is no longer beneficial. So the size has to be worth the cost. If you can't get enough food, it's not worth being in the group. If there's 200 birds and only enough food for 50, 150 of you are gonna die off anyway, right? So there is a point where it is no longer beneficial for the birds to continue increasing the size of their flock. It's also advantageous sometimes for predators to work in groups, right? It may increase their fitness or success as well. If you think about lions and wolves, these pack animals, they can work together in a group and take down a much larger prey species than if they were working on their own. This helps in the search for food as well. But if you take down a huge prey, you will feed more people. So keeping your pack together is a payoff. You use less energy because you spend less time catching your prey, less time finding your prey, less time capturing it and eating it, right? And as the predators work together, it makes their life a little easier. But again, only to a point. The size of the group can increase, but only until the optimal payoff. Once they near that payoff for individuals where there's no more payoff available to each one person, it's not worth joining the group anymore, because then you won't be, or you may not be, increasing your fitness. Another thing we look at with behavior is territory. So some things, organisms, defend a territory. It could be because they have access to special food or to certain mates, or it's their nesting site. The larger the territory, the more resources they have. But when you think about that large territory comes at a great cost. It is not easy to defend a huge amount of space. You have an easier chance of being challenged when the space you are trying to protect is larger. And so this fixed area that an individual has that they keep others out of, is known as their territory, and they will use aggressive behavior, or they will mark with urine or other things their territory. But the optimality theory tells you that the size of the territory will only be as large as the benefits are maximized, but the cost is very little. So for a bird, it may be a very small area, where for a lion, it may be a very big area, depending on what the cost and the benefits are. So an example is this sunbird, right? And he defends this territory of these little nectar-filled flowers. Well, he may not need 3 hectares of flowers in order to survive. And it would be a great cost to him to defend these 3 hectares of flowers, keeping all organisms out of where he wants to feed and mate and build his nests. Another aspect of behavior that is incredibly interesting for scientists is altruism. So the behaviors in altruism appear to benefit others, and it is actually at a cost to yourself. And so you'll often hear people talk about altruistic behaviors where, a hero goes in and saves the day by risking their own life to save someone else. Well, in nature, we see this with kin selection, and it's like a self-sacrifice that promotes the spread of an organism's gene, and it lowers their own fitness, but it enhances the reproductive success of their relatives. So what we find is that if the relatives are surviving, their genes are still passed on. So with kin selection, if you are related, someone may offer a sacrifice one to save the many, because it's all the same genes moving forward. Right. So, an organism not only passes on its own genes by having offspring, but also by ensuring its relatives survive. And this is called inclusive fitness. It designates that the total number of genes passed on through the relatives or through one's own offspring are what's important. They are all included in your total fitness because of the degree of relatedness. And so Hamilton comes up with this rule about altruistic genes, right? They are favored in natural selection when the coefficient of relatedness is high, the benefit of the recipient is high, and it's greater than the cost incurred by the donor or the person doing the selfless act, right? The coefficient of relatedness is a probability that any two individuals share particular genes. So in this image, there is this picture here will show you if you are yourself and your mate, right? You have a daughter or son, your child, your offspring is 50% related to you, right? And it has 50% of your genetics. Your granddaughter or grandson, 25%. Grandparents, 25%. Your parents, 50%. Your siblings, 50%. Niece or nephew, 25%. A half sibling, 25%. Aunts and uncles, 25%. Cousins, 0.125%, right? So when we look at this degree of relatedness, we can see the more closely you are related to someone, the more apt you are to pass on your genetic material, even if you sacrifice your life. So it's hard to think about this in terms of humans. And so when we talk about organisms, we often leave humans out of the mix, right? Whoops. So we'll look at caterpillars. Caterpillars live together and they have this big group, right? And these Titana caterpillars live together, and there are these bright colors. And so predators come along, and when a predator comes, it's going to eat a caterpillar. Well, they stay in these huge groups, right? Because the death of one caterpillar is going to benefit all of the siblings. Why? Because they are disgusting. And the predator has to eat one before it learns to not eat those caterpillars anymore, right? So the sacrifice of the one is less than the benefit of passing on the genes of the siblings. So if you are related by 50% as a sibling, and there are 50 of you, and there is one sacrifice, your total population times 50% relatedness means there's 25% chance of your genes being moved on, right? 50% chance of your genes being moved on. So 25 of them will pass on your genes, technically, in this scenario. And that is much greater than the one sacrifice you are making to have 25 more of your offspring available. So the similarities in the DNA between kin is what promotes this behavior. So some animals will act to save the lives of all of their close relatives. We also see this in prairie dogs and meerkats, right? They call out an alarm, and they're known as a sentry, right? The sentry's on the lookout, and they are going to signal high and low to draw all the attention to themselves, but give the alarm to let everyone else be able to escape and save their lives. Now, maybe the sentry will still be safe, but maybe not. If the predator outruns him and the predator, gets to him first, he endangers himself, he sacrifices himself to save his siblings. We also see altruism in eusocial animals, and it's really interesting how this comes about, right? Genetics and lifestyle create social insects and animals. And so we have these caste systems in which insects offer the most extreme form of altruism we see. And because of this, they create these sterile castes, right? Where there's one female, the queen, who can have offspring. All the other females help raise the offspring. This is eusociality. The females are diploid, males are haploid, and this is called haplodiploidy, right? But the females are more related to their sisters than they would be their own offspring, because there's only one female. So the sisters of the female have a 0.75 relatedness. Their offspring have a 0.5 relatedness. This means they're going to protect the sister more than they would protect their own offspring. And it has them then become sterile. They don't become fertile to be able to have offspring because they don't need to. Their sister is more related. It benefits them more to give her their protection and let her pass on their genes. So in the 70s, Richard Alexander predicts the existence of eusocial mammals, right? And then he finally discovers these naked mole rats, right? They live in these underground tunnels and they eat tubers. And the queen suppresses the reproduction in all other females. And so Fisher's principle shows us that natural selection will favor the production of a rarer sex, but Alexander shows us that that is not always the case, that having a female is not advantageous in eusocial naked mole rats, right? Because the queen suppresses their reproduction. They are more closely related to their sisters and will protect their queen instead of having their own offspring. So there are 4 types of pairing that we see in nature. And Fisher says that natural selection will always want a 1-to-1 balance, a sex ratio of 1-to-1. So it will always favor the production of whichever sex is lacking. But it's not always true. We don't always see that. And in some species, we see that mating is very promiscuous, right? The females and males switch partners all the time. So promiscuity is many female partners and many male partners making offspring. The opposite of that would be one male partner and one female partner making offspring, and that's monogamy, right? And it's a long-lasting pair bond. We see this in birds a lot. Another aspect would be polygyny. This is where one male has a harem of females, right? We have one male and just a boatload of females. Or we can see polyandry. And this is one female with lots of males, right? So monogamy. Snowy owls do this. These cute little penguins do this, right? There's one male who mates with one female. They're generally similar in body size and appearance, which means there's no sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism just means that the opposite sexes look and act differently. This goes along with the mate guarding hypothesis. The male stays with the female to protect her from being fertilized by other males. It also is supported by the male assistance hypothesis. Males remain with females to help raise the offspring, otherwise fewer offspring would survive. And not all organisms have lots and lots and lots of offspring. So if they want their offspring to survive, to reproduce, having 2 parents help raise the offspring gives them better survival odds. The female-enforced monogamy hypothesis is that the female interferes with the male attracting other females. She will go after the other females and attack or annoy. So polygyny, one male mates with more than one female. And we see this a lot in nature. The females mate with only one male, and it's associated with uniparental care of the young. So the males don't raise the babies, the females do. That's why they can spread their seed to so many different female organisms, because the female has to take care of the offspring. She has to deal with the gestation or the pregnancy part of the offspring, and then also the caring of the offspring, right? Sexual dimorphism here is very predominant, and we see this in different courting strategies. We see it in size. We see it in calls and mate choice. So there are a couple different types of polygyny, and there's a resource-based type, which means it's the resources available are patchy and distributed, and so the female comes to the male to get resources. When they go to get the resources, then their contribution is that they are mating with the male. The other type of polygyny is harem mating, and so the females just naturally congregate around one male, and he controls the area, keeps them safe, makes sure everyone gets to eat, things of that nature. Now, polyandry is the opposite. There's one female who mates with several males, and it's rare, but the female's usually bigger than the male. And one example of this is in the female spotted sandpiper. The reproductive success is limited only by the number of males she can find to fertilize her eggs. So she can find as many males as she wants to fertilize her eggs, and then she'll have greater reproductive success. The other example is a pipefish in a seahorse, right? A pipefish have these brood pouches, and the females produce enough eggs for 2 male brood pouches. So she gives one set of eggs to one male, and she can go find another male to protect another set of her eggs. And so that would be polyandry. So these are some of the behaviors that we see in the wild with organisms, and some of the reasons that we see them.